I've been browsing recently for a B cam, and recently I decided to pick up this bad boy right here. This is the ZV-E10 Mark II. Now I'm going to share with you and talk a little bit about this camera and why I chose this camera over the competition, the A6700 and the FX30. So stay tuned. Alright, so first things first, my name is Niclas. Before we go ahead and start talking about this camera, I would really appreciate it if you could smash that like and subscribe button, and if you're new to this channel, hello and welcome. Now first of all, I just want to say that making this video is like a big deja vu feeling for me, because I did make a very similar video, only that time I was talking about the Sony ZV-E10 and I was comparing that camera to the FX30 and the A7S III. This is a very similar situation, but this time we are in the APS-C world, not the full frame world. For the APS-C, we do have the ZV-E10 coming in as kind of the flagship for the APS-C vlogging cameras. If you are confused about the ZV-E10 Mark II and the A6700, even the FX30, don't worry about that, you're not alone. There's a lot of people out there I see that's very confused. And also many people are debating whether or not they should get the ZV-E10 Mark II and if they should get the A6700 or maybe the FX30. But when you are comparing these cameras, I think the closest competitor to the ZV-E10 Mark II is going to be the A6700, because the FX30 is quite more expensive, but that is not the case with the A6700. And one thing these cameras do have in common is that they all share the same 26 megapixel sensor. Now I did pick up the ZV-E10 Mark II, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right camera for you. I'm gonna explain why I chose this camera as my B cam, because for me it made a lot of sense getting this camera. So first of all, I just want to say that for those of you who don't know, I do have the ZV-E10 and I really wanted a B cam that could complement the ZV-E10. First of all, I wanted to mix full frame with APS-C, because when you throw a full frame lens on the APS-C camera, you get a different focal length. So I really want to use my full frame lenses on the APS-C body for like more versatility, rather than getting a bunch of new lenses. So it's just a way of mixing up. Also, something that the ZV-E10 is one of the biggest like cons of the ZV-E10, if you may, is that it does sometimes struggle with overheating. Now, I haven't encountered that much overheating, but in this student apartment that I live in, it can get fairly hot in here, and when I do these talking head videos for my studio, the camera does sometimes get way too hot, and sometimes it actually does shut down as well, I'm not gonna lie. But that is because I am sometimes, you know, I don't have the right day, I talk a lot, I mess up a lot with these talking head videos, I have to do a lot of retakes and stuff like that. And something that this camera does have going for it is that the fact that this camera does not struggle with overheating at all, unless I've heard rumors, I don't know, but if you are shooting in like direct sunlight and have it under indirect sunlight for a long period of time, it does shut down. But in a studio environment, in a controlled studio environment, it doesn't struggle with overheating, which was kind of the go-to thing I was looking for. And at the same time, sometimes I do a lot of this overhead, like on the table when I do reviews. I have a lot of reviews coming up as well, and it's very annoying when I have to take the camera off and reframe and everything. So I just want the camera that can stay still on my tripod in my studio, and don't have to reframe all the time and use it for overhead. So that is actually the main reason. But I see this camera get a lot of heat out there, and I want to talk a little bit about that. There's a lot of people that are frankly very disappointed in the ZV-E10 Mark II when it came out. I can agree with that to some extent. The biggest major thing that I disagree with, that I don't like, is that the fact that they did strip it from IBIS. That to me is, I don't understand that at all. Them stripping away IBIS in a camera like this does not make sense to me at all, because if there's something that you don't take away from a camera that's catered towards vloggers and content creators, especially vloggers who walk around with the camera and talk to the camera, you don't take away IBIS from that. Like, you can't take away IBIS from that. It's not directly a cheap camera either. It's definitely in the price range where you expect it to have IBIS, I guess, especially when you're also like marketing it towards vloggers and creators, as I said. Now, the funny thing here is that the big difference, and the reason I mentioned the ZV-E10 and the FX3 and the A7S III, is that, so when the ZV-E10 came out, they just gave it everything. They gave it all the good specs. Like, they gave it those newer features, the breathing compensation. They gave it that god tier dynamic active stabilization. They gave it the newer processor that came with the A7R5, they gave it 4K 120 for God's sake. They just threw everything they had in that camera, and they didn't even give the breathing compensation and all that to those other cameras, which I also don't agree with. But for some reason they decided to like throw everything they had and just put it in the Sony ZV-E10. Like it's so weird to me. And then the price as well, it was like sliced in half from the FX3s. Like I don't know actually what they were thinking when they did that. So I do think that the ZV-E10 was very special when it came out. And the reason I mentioned the ZV-E10 is because we are kind of in the same situation now. When you think about the FX30 and the A6700, the only difference is that this time they did not do the same thing as they did with the ZV-E10. They did not give this camera the 4K 120, which I'm pretty sure this camera is capable of because of the sensor. They all share the same 26 megapixel sensor. And they also took away IBIS, and they also stripped it from the mechanical shutter. So they took away a lot of stuff compared to what they did with the ZV-E10 is what I'm trying to say, where the camera got everything. I have been speculating a little bit about this, and what I've concluded here is that there is a bigger release gap between, this is just me purely speculating, but there's a much bigger release gap between the FX3, the A7S III, and the ZV-E10. Like, when the ZV-E10 came out, the FX3 and the A7S III has already been on the market for quite some time. And that is not really the case here with the ZV-E10 Mark II and the A6700. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's only like a year separating these cameras. And I think Sony was thinking like that. Like, I think they were struggling giving the ZV-E10 Mark II all those features that the A6700 have when they're so close, like when they're very close upon each other in terms of release dates. And then it actually made kind of a lot of sense to me when I started thinking like that, because, so let's just hypothetically say that they actually did give the ZV-E10 Mark II all those same features. Let's say that they didn't take away the mechanical shutter, let's say they gave it IBIS, and let's say that they gave it 4K 120 as well. Now the only difference and what's only separating this camera is basically the viewfinder on the A6700. And I think that's when, like, I think that's the issue Sony have now. Like, I think they had a hard time, like, separating these cameras. What can we do to also keep the price down, but also not like make it very similar to the A6700, because the A6700 does not have dual card slots. It does not have CF Express, for example, like the Sony A7S III had, which made the ZV-E10 easier kind of to separate, I guess. Because as I said, the A6700 doesn't have those things, so they are already similar right off the bat, is what I'm trying to say. So that is just me speculating. I think Sony had a hard time separating these cameras in terms of, you know, keeping the price down and also not making them the same. What I get from a lot of people out there is that they are mad that the camera didn't really get those features. So what I'm trying to say is that if the camera got those features and you also want this camera to be at the same price range, imagine being an A6700 shooter at that point. Like, seeing this camera with the same features being so much cheaper. Like, I would be super pissed if I was an A6700 shooter. And because they are so closely released upon each other, I think Sony struggled as to the ZV-E10, who was released years later from the FX3 and the A7S III, right? So that is just me trying to think logically about why they did what they did. But as I said, what I think Sony should have done is just given it IBIS and then maybe turned up the price a little bit. Yeah, I'd rather pay actually a little bit more to get IBIS into this body. So for me personally, what I'm trying to say is that if I didn't have a camera, I don't think I would have bought this camera. That's me just being completely transparent with you. But because I'm doing these kinds of talking head videos and I do this YouTube stuff and have like big plans with my YouTube channel going forward, I'm going to do so many videos. Also, I'm going to do a lot of videos on the ZV-E10 Mark II if you want to see that. And as I said, this is going to be mainly my studio camera. So that is the reason I got this camera. So I don't really need to rely on that IBIS that much. Now, if I need to shoot B-roll and stuff like that, I will always grab my Sony ZV-E10, that's just the truth. So the fact of the matter is that I don't really need IBIS that much. But I would definitely rather pay a little bit more to have it. And so the truth is that if I didn't own a camera, I actually don't think I would have bought this camera. And the same goes with if I didn't have this YouTube studio making YouTube videos. I don't think either I would have gotten this camera, I would be looking much more towards the A6700, maybe the FX30. Also, just to touch on the 4K 120 as well, I don't think the 4K 120 is that great on the A6700 nor the FX30, because the thing about the 4K 20 on those two cameras is that I think on the FX30 you have a crop factor of 1.62, which is a big crop, and the same goes for the A6700. The crop factor there is a little bit smaller, I think it's like 1.58, but still it's a huge crop. So, and the thing is, if they had put 4K 120 into this camera, I'm pretty sure the crop would have been the same here. So I don't like shooting when you have that crop factor like that. So I don't really mind them taking away 4K 120 if that means they're keeping the price down. If I ever need to shoot in 4K 120, I just grab my ZV-E10. So for me personally, I don't get bothered by that. But I can see some people wanting that, I guess. Same goes with the mechanical shutter. I see a lot of people complaining about them taking away the mechanical shutter. I have the Sony ZV-E10. I don't ever feel like I need a mechanical shutter, so for me personally, I don't care about that. And I do think that if you really do care about a mechanical shutter, you are kind of, to me, that sounds to me like you are a bit serious about photography. So if you are that serious about photography that you need a mechanical shutter, then I would assume you need a viewfinder as well, and at that point I would just go for the A6700. So touching on price here, I think it's fairly priced. There is a difference here as well. I'm going to tell you about that. I see that a lot of people say that it's like $400 or something cheaper than the A6700. But for some reason here in Norway, there's some weird stuff going on with taxes and stuff like that sometimes. I don't know, sometimes I don't know what's going on. I'm very confused. So, but for some reason, this camera is actually $700 cheaper here in Norway. And that just made the decision for me so much easier when I was deciding between the two. Also, I see something people never mention about this camera. I don't think they really think about it. And that is the fact that this camera right now is the cheapest camera you can get on the market that offers 422 4K 10-bit color depth. I think you're getting a really good camera with good quality for the price. I'm not complaining about that at all. And as I said, here in Norway, it's $700 up to the A6700, and God knows how much it is up to the FX30. I don't want to think about that. But that's the reason I got it. Now, that doesn't mean this is the right camera for you though. If you can put up the money for the A6700, or you can get an A6700 used for the same price, that is just a better camera. You will have a much better camera, a much better vlogging camera that has IBIS, viewfinder, and 4K 120. Also, I should mention that this camera does have features I do like that the A6700 does not have, like the product showcase. The fact that you can flip this camera vertically and shoot vertically is very nice, where the menu flips as well. That is something they brought new to this camera. And also, this camera actually has the best internal microphones out of all the Sony cameras right now. So it does have some things going for it, but the internal microphone is not something I will use personally, but for ease of use for vloggers and stuff like that, I can totally see that this is a very handy thing for them to have. So to sum up, I think you're getting a good camera overall for the money you're paying for it. It's just a shame about that IBIS. That is the only big complaint I have really about this camera. From everything they stripped away from this camera, I do actually understand, because they don't want to put it right next to the A6700. And also they want to keep the price down. That's just the way I see it. So anyways, please don't forget to smash that like and subscribe button. That would be highly appreciated. Also, if you have the ZV-E10 Mark II or you're planning to buying the ZV-E10 Mark II, I am going to make a ton of videos on this camera. I'm going to make a lot of tutorials and stuff like that. So feel free to subscribe and like this video to stay tuned for more upcoming ZV-E10 II videos. And yeah, take care. See you guys in my next video. Have a good one.